Hello everyone and welcome to Feast Your Mind, a series of lectures that have been designed for you to be different to your normal curriculum, around interesting topics with some aspects of challenge for you, to maybe delve in over lunchtime with your family if you so wish to. We've called it Feast Your Mind because the idea is that it's something that you can add on to your already brilliant learning. And if you can sort of watch it over lunchtime and then just chit chat about it with an older sibling or, like I said, parents, family, whoever, I think that'd be so useful for you. I do hope that you're joining every week. There'll be a different teacher every week teaching on a different topic, on something that may be new, exciting, weird, or just simply interesting. Today, I'm going to be discussing with you the action of HIV, and next week, Mr. Fisher will be delivering a session for you. We will be looking at the action and kind of structure of HIV. We're going to look also what AIDS is. And I've put on there our school Holding Hands logo so that you can recognise that some of the things I might talk about in this session may be sensitive. They may provoke questions in you, and I'll do my best to make sure that I am very sensitive when talking about certain parts of the topic. I'm going to talk about the global impact of HIV. 1.5 to 1.9 million people die from HIV virus every year globally. 37.9 million people across the globe were diagnosed with HIV or AIDS in 2018. And of this, 36.2 million were adults and 1.7 million were children that were under the age of 15. 103,800 are living with HIV in the UK, and 93% of these people are diagnosed, meaning that about 1 in 15 people are currently living with HIV in the UK but do not know that they have it. There has been a decrease of the number of deaths in the last decade in the UK. It's 20% decrease because of drug therapy that's been developed. If untreated, HIV will develop into AIDS, and I will come back onto that later on. But what I want us to think about now is, where did the virus come from? And this is really relevant to what's going on in the world right now, because some of you may have looked up or considered, where did COVID-19 come from? And it's not too dissimilar from this situation. A virus came from another source. Now, in terms of HIV, the first noted epidemic began in the early 1980s. And it was then that scientists were trying to work out, where did it come from? I'm going to play a video for you on the next slide, where Dorothy Crawford, a professor from medical microbiology at the University of Edinburgh, will talk to you about what the scientists did.
It was identified basically in 1983 in the United States, about 2 years after AIDS was first noticed there. But it soon became apparent that actually it was much more common in Africa, and it looked as if the virus must have come from there. But I think it was a shock to everybody to discover just how widespread it was in Africa by that time. And so it became pretty obvious that it must have evolved there, many years before, and in fact scientists have now worked out that it was actually about 100 years before. So it had been around for a long time, sort of slowly creeping around and increasing in the population without ever being noticed. And so scientists, obviously focusing on sort of West Central Africa, were looking at where the virus could have jumped from. I mean, the most likely thing is that it would have jumped from an animal source. And it soon became apparent that primates carried viruses that were actually quite similar to HIV. And so they started looking in animals, primates from zoos and from wildlife centres and things, and eventually found a virus that was pretty similar in chimpanzees. But the problem was that they looked at about 1,000 chimpanzees and only found the virus in 4 of them, 3 of which had a virus that was very similar to HIV and 1 of which had a virus that was not so similar. So it was all very difficult, and it really took years to work out. First of all, a different group of scientists discovered that, or published that there were several different subspecies of chimpanzees, and that sorted out 3 of the ones that had a similar virus were of one subspecies, and the one that had a different one was another subspecies. So, but even so, 3 out of 1,000 really is not good enough to say that's where it came from. And so the scientists decided that they would have to look at chimpanzees in the wild. And so began a really detailed and long study of wild chimpanzees. And as you can imagine, I mean, these animals are, well, they're rare, they're reclusive, they don't like humans, they're aggressive, they're large, and what's more, they're an endangered species, so you can't just march up to one and take a blood sample. So scientists actually spent 2 years working out how to get the virus from these animals, and in the end they worked out methods of not only finding the virus from chimpanzee feces scraped off the forest floor, but they could also actually tell which individual chimpanzee it came from, what its subspecies was, and isolate the virus from those feces. So this study looked at 600 samples of feces, which were collected in the Cameroon, where these animals live. They were flown to the United States, where the virus was extracted, or the virus genome was extracted from them, and then those sequences were flown to the United Kingdom, Edinburgh, in fact, where I come from, where a colleague of mine, Paul Sharp, actually devised evolutionary trees looking at the evolutionary relationship between these primate viruses and HIV. And so, amazingly, they've actually managed to identify virtually the one troop of chimpanzees which carry the virus, which is most similar to HIV, and therefore that's probably where the virus came from. And those chimpanzees live in the very southeast corner of the Cameroon.
So, scientists identified a type of chimpanzee in West Africa as the source of HIV infection in humans. It's thought that the virus most likely jumped from chimpanzee to humans when humans hunted the animals for meat and came into contact with their infected blood. Over several years, the virus slowly spread across Africa and later to other parts of the world. There are other theories about the origin of HIV, and if you're interested, do go look these up. So I'm going to talk to you now about what the difference between HIV and AIDS is. HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus. Now don't be put off by that long word. We're looking at something that attacks the human body and specifically the immune system, causing it to weaken, and therefore the ability to fight off everyday infections and disease is limited. HIV is a contagious virus in that if you are not taking medication, you're at risk of spreading the virus to other people. AIDS, however, acquired immune deficiency syndrome. This is the name given to describe a number of potentially life-threatening infections and illnesses that happen when your immune system is severely damaged by the HIV virus. AIDS is called now the most advanced stage of HIV infection. If you have HIV and you're not on any treatment, eventually your body's immune system will weaken and slowly will progress to AIDS. It's not a quick process though. On average, it takes around 8 years to reach this stage. That is, of course, if the person doesn't receive any treatment. AIDS cannot be passed from person to person, but HIV can. There is currently no cure for HIV, but there are really effective drug treatments that enable most people to live with the virus and live long, healthy lives. So let's summarize this, shall we? HIV is a virus, human immunodeficiency virus. It attacks our immune system and weakens it so that it becomes compromised, and it's difficult to fight the basic of infections. AIDS. This is acquired immune deficiency syndrome. It's a medical condition. It's when your immune system is just too weak to fight off infections, and it's called the late stage of HIV infection. Okay, I'm hoping that Year 7 and Year 8 you are going to remember when you covered the cells topic in Year 7. You will have gone over the structure of an animal cell and you would have labelled it with labels like this. On the outside, you have the cell membrane. On the inside, the main body of the cell is the cytoplasm. And then you've got the nucleus. Can you remember what's in the nucleus? I do hope so. In the nucleus is your DNA. So in every cell in your body, as long as it has a nucleus, there's DNA in there. But your cells don't really look like this. They actually have lots of different shapes. And you'll remember when we did specialised cells, you learned all different types of cells. Muscle cells, red blood cells, nerve cells, sex cells. HIV virus is very particular in the cell that it attacks. It attacks the immune cells of our body. A special cell actually called a T cell, which we're going to learn about momentarily. Now, T cells are just a form of a white blood cell, which are part of your immune system. A white blood cell's role is to simply fight infection. Now, what the HIV virus does is target these cells, particularly a CD4 T cell. Now, that's just because on the membrane of that white blood cell, there is a little protein called CD4, which HIV attaches to. You don't need to know that in much detail, but it's an interesting note to point out to you. So on the next slide, you're going to watch a video that explains how HIV enters the CD4 T cell in your body.
HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus. It works by attacking the immune system, the very thing that stops us getting sick. HIV targets CD4 T cells in the immune system, cells which usually coordinate our body's immune response. The virus takes over these cells and uses them to make copies of itself. Over time, HIV kills more and more of these CD4 cells, weakening the body's immune system and its ability to recognize and fight infections. If HIV isn't controlled by treatment, eventually the body becomes unable to fight off serious opportunistic infections, including tuberculosis, leukemia, pneumonia, and Kaposi sarcoma. It's these opportunistic infections that can cause death. Many people confuse HIV and AIDS. HIV is the virus that attacks the immune system. AIDS is a set of symptoms and illnesses that are a result of an immune system seriously damaged by HIV. AIDS is now more commonly called late-stage HIV. There's no cure for HIV, but antiretroviral treatment stops the virus from replicating and damaging the immune system. A person living with HIV who's on effective treatment can live a long and healthy life and never progress to late-stage HIV.
So, from that video, you should have understood that HIV requires a host cell. Now, a host cell is basically another living cell that virus can use in order to replicate inside. It attaches to the T cell and enters the cell. And interestingly, it turns that cell into a virus-producing factory. Now, I have an image here to kind of show that to you and explain this to you in a bit more depth. HIV contains DNA, just like our cells. However, it doesn't contain it in the way that our cells do. It doesn't have a double-stranded DNA. It has something called RNA, and all that is, it's a single strand of genetic information. RNA alone can't actually reproduce new cells. So what the virus does is inserts its DNA into our cell and then uses our DNA to create double-stranded DNA of itself. Now what that means is the virus will enter our cell and its DNA will become part of our DNA too. It essentially inserts its DNA within our own, so that the T cell then starts to reproduce HIV virus cells, as you can see they're coming out of the image on the right. And therefore, eventually that T cell will die and no longer function to kill off invading pathogens. Pathogens, I mean microbes, bacteria, viruses, things like that. If this continues, eventually the number of T cells in the body will reduce so drastically that the body will not be able to fight off the simplest of infections. And every single HIV virus that's produced from our own T cell then goes on to infect more T cells. So as you've heard, the HIV virus is very, very smart at hiding in our cells and hiding in our DNA. So it's really important that we are armed with information on how the virus spreads, how we can prevent it and how we can treat it. And that's what I'm going to discuss now. As you can see, I've placed the Holding Hand logo back on the slide here so that you can recognise that I may be talking about something that's a bit sensitive. So HIV virus is transmitted in sort of 4 main ways: through unprotected sex, through mother to baby, through the sharing of contaminated needles, or through blood transfusions. So mainly HIV can be transferred in bodily fluids, that is blood, semen and breast milk. Interestingly, the picture there showing the lady receiving a blood transfusion, we're quite very fortunate in our country that blood donations are tested prior to their use. In other countries, this may not be the case. I want to discuss some of the myths associated with HIV. If you are HIV positive, or you're a family member a family member that is HIV positive, you cannot contract the virus from them in these ways. Hugging will not mean that you catch the virus. Sharing food, insect bites, toilet seats, going swimming, sneezing or coughing, the virus is transferred in bodily fluids. Now, technically, if you have an open wound and you share, let's say, a kiss and you too have an open wound, then you do have a higher risk of passing the virus along. Yes, true, but very highly unlikely. And I'll come to in a moment the drug treatment available, but if someone is aware that they're HIV positive and are on drug treatment, it is highly unlikely that they will pass it on to you. So there are a number of ways that we can prevent the spread. The main ones obviously are not engaging in unprotected sex, not sharing contaminated needles and things like that. But in our country and in the US, there are prevention strategies available. In the US, I put that image up there because in a couple of weeks' time, they will have their National HIV Testing Day on June 27th. That is the day that they encourage everyone to get their blood tested. And it's based on the idea that there are many people that are walking around and are unaware that they have the infection. In the UK, we have HIV National Testing Week, which is in November, where you're meant to give HIV the finger. That's a campaign, that's what it's called. You are asked to do a finger prick test where you draw some blood and you send that off for testing. And you can do that at home or in a clinic or in a hospital. And finally, treatment. Now, prevention is key, but should someone get to the point where they then require treatment, they will receive something called antiretroviral drug therapy. Now, the medicines they will receive do not cure HIV, but they do help them to live a long, healthy life. Generally, they have to take a combination of medications, and this is because the virus can mutate. HIV medications actually prevent the person from advancing from HIV into AIDS. It basically stops the replication of the virus, meaning that HIV virus can no longer hijack any more of our T cells, which is brilliant. It cannot reverse the damage, but it can most definitely stop it from getting worse. So I'd like to summarise what we've covered so far today. We have looked at the difference between HIV and AIDS and understood that HIV is a virus, whereas AIDS is the later stages of HIV infection. And it's when the immune system is so severely damaged that it's hard for us to fight off simple infections. We talked about the origin and structure of HIV. HIV is believed to be originated from chimpanzees in West Africa. The virus is circular and it contains RNA instead of DNA. And the virus is very particular. It attacks a specific white blood cell, reducing the effectiveness of our immune system. HIV is spread mainly through bodily fluids, as I discussed, through blood, through semen, and through breast milk from a person who has HIV. Prevention and treatment. We've looked at ways to reduce the spread, and that is mainly through practicing safe sex, not sharing contaminated needles, and having regular blood tests. HIV is treatable but not curable, and they work by stopping the virus replicating in the body, allowing the immune system to repair itself and prevent further damage. So I'm leaving you with some thinking questions now because I didn't go over everything. HIV is a retrovirus, and I've not mentioned that today, so why not go look up what a retrovirus is? There is no cure for HIV. Why is that so? What's hepatitis C? Why can hepatitis C be cured but not HIV? Now, I urge you, if you're going to look up these questions, to do so with an adult or an older sibling, as you may get high-level answers that are sort of degree level, and I don't want you to be too confused. And I do want you to feel encouraged when you're researching these things. Do feel free to look into the origin of HIV or the origin of even COVID-19 if that's something of interest also. So we've been able to cover today the action of HIV and look at what AIDS is. Do look out for the next lecture, which is coming up next week, which is going to be led by Mr. Fisher. But thank you so much for listening today. Take care, everyone.